You either babysit your nieces every single day or you start paying the full rent. $1,750 a month. Your choice, Haley. My mom stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, blocking my path to the front door like I was some kind of prisoner trying to escape. My dad sat at the kitchen table behind her, nodding along as if everything she said was reasonable. My older sister Brittany lounged on the couch in the living room, scrolling through her phone while her two daughters, aged 3 and 5, ran screaming through the house, knocking over everything in their path. I clutched my backpack straps, already running late for my evening shift at the coffee shop. Mom, I have work, I have classes, I have a life. I cannot watch Brittany's kids every single day while she does nothing. Brittany is going through a hard time, my dad chimed in, his voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointment he reserved exclusively for me. She needs family support right now. A hard time. That was the phrase they had been using for the past 6 years to excuse every irresponsible decision my sister made. She had her first daughter, Madison, when she was 22, after a whirlwind romance with a guy named Tyler, who disappeared 3 months into the pregnancy. Then came Jaden, born to a different father named Curtis, who stuck around just long enough to miss the birth before vanishing to pursue his dream of becoming a professional poker player in Las Vegas. My name is Haley, and I am 24 years old. I live in Omaha, Nebraska, in a cramped 2-story house with my parents, my sister, and her 2 children. I am a full-time college student pursuing my degree in accounting, and I work part-time at a local coffee shop to cover my tuition, books, and whatever scraps of independence I can scrape together. For the past 3 years, I have been treated like the family's unpaid nanny, housekeeper, and emotional punching bag. The situation had started gradually, the way these things always do. When Madison was born, I was 18 and still living at home to save money for college. My parents asked me to help out occasionally, just here and there, while Brittany adjusted to motherhood. I agreed because that is what families do. But occasional help turned into daily expectations. Daily expectations turned into mandatory obligations. And mandatory obligations turned into the prison I found myself trapped in that evening. I already contribute to this household, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I buy my own groceries. I pay for my car insurance. I clean the entire house every weekend because nobody else will lift a finger. That is not enough anymore, my mom replied coldly. Things have changed around here. Your father's hours got cut at the plant, and we are struggling financially. If you want to continue living here, you need to step up and do your part. Step up. Another phrase they love to weaponize against me. Brittany had never stepped up a single day in her life, yet somehow I was always the one falling short of their expectations. I looked past my mom toward my sister in the living room. Brittany did not even glance up from her phone. She was 28 years old, had never held a job for longer than 2 months, and spent her days watching reality television while her children destroyed the house around her. My parents had been paying for everything she needed since the day she dropped out of community college, yet they had the audacity to demand more from me. What about Brittany? I asked, feeling the frustration rising in my chest. Why does she not get a job and pay rent? Why does she not watch her own children instead of expecting me to do it? The silence that followed was deafening. My mom's expression hardened into something resembling disgust. My dad shook his head slowly, as if I had just said something unforgivable and deeply offensive to them both. Brittany is a single mother, my mom said, each word dripping with condescension. She has enough on her plate dealing with 2 young children. You, on the other hand, have no real responsibilities. You go to school. You work a few hours at some coffee place. That is nothing compared to what she deals with every single day. I felt the familiar burn of injustice rising in my chest. Nothing compared to what she deals with. As if attending college full-time, while working 25 hours a week and maintaining a decent grade point average, was somehow less demanding than lying on a couch all day, while someone else raised your children for you. I have a midterm exam next week, I said quietly. If I fail this class, I lose my scholarship and everything I have worked for. Then study while you babysit, my mom snapped impatiently. Other people manage to do both at the same time. You are not special, Haley. You need to learn that. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to tell her that I had been managing for years while receiving no credit, no appreciation, and no support from anyone in this family. But I had learned long ago that arguing with my parents about Brittany was completely pointless. In their eyes, she could do no wrong, and I could never do anything right. As I pushed past my mom and walked out the front door into the cold evening air, I heard my dad mutter something under his breath. Something about ungrateful children and disrespect for everything they had sacrificed. I climbed into my old Honda Civic with the cracked windshield and rusted bumper, started the engine, and sat there for a long moment, trying to remember how to breathe normally. That night, as I made lattes and cleaned espresso machines at the coffee shop, I could not shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in my relationship with my family. My parents were no longer asking for help or requesting assistance. They were issuing ultimatums and making demands. And somewhere deep in my gut, I knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning of something worse. I did not know yet just how right I was about that feeling. The truth is, I had been the family's invisible support system since I was 16 years old. That was the year my grandmother on my mom's side passed away unexpectedly, leaving behind a small inheritance that my parents immediately used to help Brittany buy a car. Not me. Brittany. Because she needed transportation to get to her community college classes, the ones she would drop out of 6 months later without any consequences. I remember standing in the kitchen when my dad announced the decision to the family. I had just gotten my learner's permit and was saving every penny from my part-time job, bagging groceries to eventually buy my own vehicle. The inheritance would have covered at least a decent down payment on something reliable for me. But that money vanished into a shiny red sedan that Brittany totaled within 8 months because she was texting while driving and ran a stop sign. My parents paid for her next car, too, and the one after that when she damaged it in a parking lot accident. When I graduated high school with honors and a partial scholarship to the University of Nebraska at Omaha, my parents threw a small party in the backyard. Small being the operative word. When Brittany had graduated 3 years earlier with barely passing grades and no plans for the future whatsoever, they had rented out a banquet hall at a local restaurant and invited 50 people to celebrate her accomplishment. The disparity was not lost on me, but I had learned to swallow my disappointment by then. It was simply how things worked in our family. The babysitting started in earnest when Madison was 6 months old. Brittany claimed she needed to get out of the house regularly for her mental health, so my parents volunteered my services without asking me first or considering my schedule. I would come home from my afternoon classes to find the baby in a playpen, my sister nowhere to be found, and a note on the refrigerator saying she would be back by dinner. She rarely was back by dinner. Sometimes she would not return until well past midnight. My parents never questioned where Brittany went during these frequent disappearances. They never asked why she needed 8 hours of mental health time while her infant daughter screamed for attention and needed constant care. They simply expected me to handle it without complaint, and when I dared to express frustration, they accused me of being selfish and unsupportive of my struggling sister. By the time Jaden was born 2 years later to a different father, I had become the de facto primary caregiver for both children. My entire schedule revolved around their needs, not my own. I missed study groups because Madison had a doctor's appointment that Brittany forgot about until the last minute. I turned down extra shifts at work because Jaden was sick and nobody else would watch her. I lost friendships because I could never go out, could never commit to plans in advance, could never be anything other than available for whatever crisis arose next in the household. My friend group from high school had dwindled to almost nothing over the years. The few people who still reached out eventually stopped when I canceled on them for the 10th or 20th time with increasingly flimsy excuses. The loneliness was crushing, but I told myself constantly that it was temporary. Once I graduated and got a real job with my accounting degree, I could move out and start my own life. I just had to survive until then. The warning signs that things were about to get significantly worse started appearing about 3 months before that confrontation in the kitchen. My dad's manufacturing company announced layoffs due to economic pressures, and while he kept his job initially, his hours were reduced significantly starting the following month. My mom, who worked part-time as a receptionist at a dental office, picked up a few extra shifts to help compensate, but it was not nearly enough to cover the gap in their income. Instead of asking Brittany to contribute financially or find employment, my parents started making pointed comments about my financial situation. How much did I make at the coffee shop exactly? How much was I spending on frivolous things like textbooks and school supplies? Did I really need to pay for a gym membership when I could just run outside for free like normal people? The gym membership comment stung particularly hard because I did not have a gym membership and never had one. I had never been able to afford such a luxury. They were inventing expenses to justify demanding more from me, while completely ignoring the actual drain on the family finances that was Brittany's lifestyle. Her constant online shopping that filled the mailbox with packages, her subscription boxes for makeup and skincare products, her weekly trips to get her nails done professionally while I watched her children without compensation. But I kept my mouth shut and tried to stay focused on my goals. One more year of school. One more year of keeping my head down and doing what was expected of me. Then I would be free from all of this. That was the lie I told myself anyway to keep going. The night of the ultimatum, I came home from my shift at the coffee shop around 11:30, exhausted and emotionally drained. The house was dark, except for the flickering glow of the television in the living room, where Brittany had fallen asleep on the couch, surrounded by empty chip bags and soda cans. Madison and Jaden were supposed to be in bed hours ago, but I could hear them giggling loudly upstairs, clearly still wide awake. I walked past my sleeping sister without waking her, climbed the creaky stairs, and found both children jumping on the bed in the room they shared. Jaden was only 3, young enough that being awake this late could throw off her entire schedule for days and make her cranky and difficult. Madison, at 5, knew better than to stay up this late, but apparently did not care about the rules. "Girls, it is way past your bedtime," I said, trying to keep my voice gentle despite my overwhelming exhaustion. "Mommy said we could stay up late tonight," Madison replied defiantly, crossing her small arms. "Mommy is asleep downstairs on the couch. Come on, let us get you both tucked in properly." It took me 45 minutes to calm them down, read them 2 stories, and finally get them to close their eyes and drift off to sleep. By the time I made it to my own tiny bedroom at the end of the narrow hall, I was running on fumes. I had a paper due in 2 days that I had not started writing yet, a shift at work the next morning starting at 6, and now apparently an impossible choice hanging over my head like a dark cloud. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall in front of me. The paint was peeling in the corner where water damage from a leak my parents never properly fixed had left its mark years ago. My furniture was the same furniture I had used since middle school, worn and outdated. My closet was barely big enough to hold my clothes, most of which I had bought secondhand or received as birthday gifts. This was my life. This was what I had accepted for years, because I believed it was the only option available to me. But that night, something shifted inside me fundamentally. Maybe it was the exhaustion finally reaching its peak. Maybe it was the unfairness of being asked to choose between my future and my freedom. Maybe it was simply the accumulation of 1,000 small indignities, finally reaching a breaking point that could not be ignored any longer. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app with trembling fingers. I had been saving money in a separate account that my parents did not know about and could not access. It was not much. A few $1,000s scraped together over years of careful budgeting and occasional windfalls like birthday money from distant relatives. But it was something tangible. It was a start toward something better. I began searching for apartments in the area near my university. 3 weeks passed after the ultimatum, and the atmosphere in the house grew more poisonous by the day. My parents had given me a firm deadline to make my decision, and that deadline was rapidly approaching like a storm on the horizon. In the meantime, they had doubled down on their expectations, treating me with open contempt whenever I failed to meet their increasingly unreasonable demands. The schedule they imposed was brutal and deliberately designed to be impossible. I was expected to watch Madison and Jaden from 7 in the morning until noon, then again from 4 in the afternoon until 8 at night without exception. That left me a 4-hour window during the day to attend all my classes, work my shifts, study for exams, and somehow maintain my sanity. It was mathematically impossible to accomplish everything, and they knew it perfectly well. I tried to negotiate with them multiple times. I offered to pay $300 a month in rent instead of the full $1,750 they demanded. I offered to babysit on specific days rather than every single day of the week. I offered to help find Brittany a job so she could contribute to her own children's care, like a responsible parent. Every single suggestion was rejected without consideration. "You are being ridiculous and ungrateful," my mom said during one particularly heated conversation in the kitchen. "Do you think landlords negotiate with tenants in the real world? This is the real world, Haley. Grow up and accept your responsibilities." The irony of her lecturing me about the real world while her 28-year-old daughter contributed nothing to the household was not lost on me. But I bit my tongue hard and continued planning my escape in secret. Finding an apartment on my limited budget was challenging and stressful. Most places required first and last month's rent plus a security deposit, which would wipe out almost everything I had saved over the years. But after days of searching, I found a promising listing for a shared student apartment near campus. A girl named Whitney was looking for a roommate to split a 2-bedroom unit with her. The rent was $600 a month plus utilities, and she was willing to be flexible about the move-in date. I messaged Whitney immediately and arranged to see the apartment the next afternoon. I told my parents I had a group project meeting at school, which was not entirely untrue since I did have a project to work on. I just also had another agenda that day. The apartment was small, but clean and well-maintained. Whitney was a graduate student in the biology department, quiet and studious, exactly the kind of roommate I needed at this point in my life. We talked for over an hour about expectations, schedules, and boundaries in shared living spaces. She did not care if I studied late at night. She did not expect me to clean up after her or cook her meals or raise her children. She simply wanted someone reliable to split the rent with. I signed a lease that same day, with hands that shook slightly. Move-in date was scheduled for the 1st of the following month, just 5 days away from that moment. Walking back to my car after signing the paperwork, I felt a complicated mix of emotions swirling inside me. Relief, fear, guilt, excitement, anxiety. I had never done anything this significant without my parents' knowledge or approval. I had never made a decision that I knew would cause conflict and fallout in the family. But I also knew, deep in my bones, that this was the right choice for my future. I drove home and found my sister exactly where I had left her that morning, on the couch, watching television with glazed eyes, while her daughters tore apart the house around her completely unsupervised. My parents were both at work, which meant the chaos was entirely uncontrolled and spreading through every room. "Can you grab Jaden?" Brittany asked without looking up from the screen. "She has been asking for a snack for like 20 minutes and I am in the middle of something important." I looked at the television. She was watching a reality show about wealthy people buying vacation homes in tropical locations. That was the important something she was in the middle of. "Where are the snacks for the kids?" I asked, my voice flat and emotionless. "I do not know. Kitchen somewhere, probably. Mom usually handles all that stuff." I walked into the kitchen and found the pantry nearly empty. No crackers, no fruit snacks, no applesauce pouches. Just a half-eaten bag of pretzels that had gone stale days ago, and some canned goods that required actual cooking to prepare. I grabbed the pretzels and brought them to Jaden, who immediately started crying because she wanted goldfish crackers, not pretzels, and this was completely unacceptable to her. "Brittany, there is nothing for the kids to eat," I said, returning to the living room doorway. "So go to the store and buy something then." "I do not have money for groceries." I buy my own food separately, remember? That was the arrangement. My sister finally looked at me directly, her expression one of pure annoyance and irritation. Then ask Mom for her card when she gets home. I do not know what you want me to do about it. Figure it out yourself. You are the responsible one around here. That phrase hit differently that afternoon. You are the responsible one. It was supposed to be a compliment, a recognition of my reliability, but it had always been used as a weapon to guilt me into doing more than my fair share. Being responsible meant being taken advantage of constantly. Being responsible meant having no boundaries that anyone respected. Being responsible meant sacrificing my own needs endlessly so that irresponsible people never had to face any consequences for their choices. I did not go to the store that day. I made peanut butter sandwiches with the last of the bread and gave them to the girls, then retreated to my room to work on my paper in peace. My sister complained loudly to my parents when they got home from work, and I received another lecture about being unhelpful and selfish and not thinking about the family. But for the first time in years, their words did not penetrate my armor. I had a plan. I had a way out of this situation. All I had to do was survive 5 more days without breaking. The night before my scheduled move, I began packing in secret after everyone had gone to sleep. I waited until the house was completely quiet, then carefully filled boxes and bags with my belongings as silently as possible. Clothes, books, my laptop and chargers. The small collection of things that were truly mine in a house that had never felt like home. I worked silently, methodically, moving with the precision of someone who had been planning this moment for weeks. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart race with fear. Every distant sound made me freeze in place. I could not risk being discovered before I was ready. I could not risk another confrontation that might derail everything I had worked toward. By 2 a.m, everything I owned was packed and ready to go. I had arranged with Whitney to pick up my things the following afternoon while my parents were at work. I would leave the house keys on my dresser and walk out the front door one final time without looking back. But as I stood in my empty room surveying the stripped-down furniture and bare walls, I realized I could not wait until afternoon. The weight of another day in this house was more than I could bear. The thought of one more breakfast filled with passive-aggressive comments and hostile glares. One more hour of watching my sister do nothing while I was expected to do everything. One more moment of being treated like the family's least important member while simultaneously being expected to hold everything together. I looked at the clock on my phone. 2:14 in the morning. I pulled out my phone and texted Whitney with trembling fingers. I know this is crazy and I apologize for the late hour, but is there any way I could come tonight instead of tomorrow? Her response came within minutes, which surprised me since it was the middle of the night. She was apparently also a night owl who kept unusual hours. Sure, she wrote back. I will leave the door unlocked for you. Just let yourself in quietly. My heart pounded loudly in my chest as I made the decision. I loaded my car in 3 silent trips, each one feeling like an eternity of holding my breath. The house remained dark and quiet throughout. Nobody stirred. Nobody knew what I was doing. At 2:47 in the morning, I placed my house key on the kitchen counter next to a note I had written earlier that evening. The note was brief and to the point. I am moving out. Please do not contact me for a while. I need space to figure things out. I did not apologize in the note. I did not explain my reasoning. I did not beg for understanding or forgiveness. I simply walked out the front door, climbed into my car, and drove away into the darkness. The streets of Omaha were empty at that hour, illuminated only by streetlights and the occasional passing vehicle. I drove toward my new apartment with the windows cracked open, letting the cold night air wash over me and keep me alert. I was shaking uncontrollably, though whether from fear or exhilaration I could not tell anymore. What I did not know, as I pulled into the parking lot of my new building and began unloading my belongings in the quiet darkness, was that my departure would set off a chain of events that would expose truths my parents had been hiding for years. That my absence would force them to confront the consequences of their choices directly. That the comfortable arrangement they had built on my labor and sacrifice was about to come crashing down around them spectacularly. I thought I was simply leaving a toxic situation and starting fresh. I had no idea I was also lighting a match that would burn down the facade they had carefully constructed. The first indication that something had gone wrong at my parents' house came at 7:23 in the morning, roughly 5 hours after I left. My phone exploded with notifications that woke me from a restless sleep. Missed calls from my mom. Missed calls from my dad. Text messages from both of them, escalating in tone from confused to angry to outright threatening. "Where are you? Haley, answer your phone right now. This is not funny. The girls woke up crying and Brittany can't find you anywhere. If you don't call back in 10 minutes, I'm reporting you as a missing person to the police." I stared at my phone from the comfort of my new bed, in my new room, in my new apartment that smelled like fresh paint and possibility and freedom. Whitney had gone back to sleep after helping me unload my car, and I was alone with my thoughts and the chaos unfolding remotely through my phone screen. Part of me wanted to respond immediately. Part of me felt guilty for the panic I was causing my family. But a larger part, the part that had been silenced and suppressed for years, felt something else entirely. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. I turned my phone on silent mode and went back to sleep. When I woke up around noon, I had accumulated 47 missed calls and over 100 text messages from various family members. My sister had joined the barrage at some point, her messages alternating between accusations and demands. "You left me with the kids and no warning. How am I supposed to handle them alone? This is so typical of you, always thinking about yourself first." The audacity of that last line almost made me laugh out loud. Brittany, who had thought about nothing but herself for as long as I could remember, was accusing me of selfishness. The irony was too bitter to be genuinely funny. I scrolled through the messages without responding, piecing together what had happened from their increasingly frantic communications. My mom had discovered my note around 6 in the morning when she came downstairs to start her coffee. She had immediately tried to call me multiple times, then woken up my dad in a panic, then barged into Brittany's room to announce that I had apparently abandoned them all without warning. Brittany's first concern, according to the messages, was who would watch the girls while she went to her nail appointment that afternoon. Not where I had gone, not whether I was safe. Just who would cover her scheduled self-care time now that I was not available. My dad's messages were more measured but no less manipulative in their tone. "Haley, whatever is going on, we can talk about it like reasonable adults. Running away doesn't solve anything or help anyone. Come home and we'll work this out together as a family, like adults." As if they had ever treated me like an adult. As if their ultimatum and their demands and their constant belittling had been the actions of reasonable people engaging in good faith negotiation with me. I finally responded to my mom at 2 in the afternoon, after I had showered, eaten a proper breakfast, and started to feel something resembling human again. The message was simple and direct. I am safe. I moved out. Please respect my request for space. Her response was immediate and volcanic with rage. Space? You want space? After everything we've done for you over the years? You ungrateful little traitor. You have destroyed this family with your selfishness. I hope you're happy with yourself. I read her words 3 times, waiting for them to hurt like they always had. Waiting for the familiar sting of maternal disapproval that had controlled my behavior for so long. But it did not come this time. All I felt was a strange emptiness, like the place where her opinion used to matter had been hollowed out and sealed over permanently. I blocked her number without hesitation. Then I blocked my dad's number. Then I blocked Brittany's number. The silence that followed was the most peaceful thing I had experienced in years. But my family's problems were only beginning. What I did not know, as I settled into my new life and focused on catching up with my schoolwork, was that my departure had exposed a fundamental instability in the household finances. An instability they had been masking for months and hiding from everyone, including me. 2 days after I left, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up anyway. "Is this Haley?" The voice was male, professional, and completely unfamiliar to me. "Who is asking?" "My name is Gerald, and I am calling from Oakwood Property Management. I am the landlord for the property at 723 Maple Street. My parents' house, my former address." "I am not sure why you are calling me," I said carefully. "I do not live there anymore." "I am aware of that fact. Your mother informed me of your departure when I called about the overdue rent. However, your name is still on the lease as a co-tenant, so I needed to reach out to you directly as well." My blood ran cold in my veins. "I am sorry, what? My name is on the lease?" "Yes. You were added as a co-tenant approximately 3 years ago. Your mother said it was to help build your credit history since you were young. But that also means you are jointly responsible for any outstanding debts or damages to the property." I sank onto my bed, my mind racing with this new information. 3 years ago. That was when my parents had asked me to sign some paperwork for what they claimed was a utility account in my name. I had been 19, trusting, and too overwhelmed with school to read the fine print carefully. I had signed where they pointed without questioning their motives. They had put me on their lease without telling me the truth about what I was actually signing. "How much is overdue?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. 3 months of rent. Plus, there is some significant damage to the property that needs to be addressed before it gets worse. All told, we are looking at approximately $6,000 in total. $6,000. That was more than double what I had managed to save in my secret account over the years. That was my entire financial cushion, gone in an instant. "I need to think about this carefully," I said, struggling to keep my composure and not break down crying. "Can I call you back?" "Of course, but understand that if this is not resolved within 30 days, we will be forced to begin eviction proceedings. And that will affect everyone on the lease, including you and your credit history." I hung up and sat in stunned silence for a long time. The walls of my new apartment suddenly felt like they were closing in on me. The freedom I had tasted just days ago was slipping away, replaced by a new kind of trap I had not anticipated. My parents had not only exploited me for years, they had also set me up to take the fall for their financial failures without my knowledge or consent. And now, even after leaving, I was still caught in their web of deception. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of barely controlled panic and desperation. I researched tenant law in Nebraska extensively. I called the university's free legal clinic and scheduled an appointment for the earliest available time. I combed through all my financial records trying to understand how this had happened and what my options might be. What I discovered was both infuriating and illuminating. My parents had been struggling financially for much longer than they had admitted to anyone. My dad's hours had been cut multiple times over the past 2 years, not just recently as they had claimed. My mom had actually lost her dental receptionist job 6 months ago and had been hiding it from everyone, including my dad, by claiming to pick up extra shifts that did not exist. She spent her days at the library or wandering the mall aimlessly, pretending to work while the bills piled up. The rent had been overdue since before they issued me the ultimatum. The $1,750 they demanded from me was not about teaching me responsibility or making me contribute fairly. It was about covering their own shortfall without having to admit to anyone that they were failing as providers. And the damage to the property? That was entirely Brittany's doing. Her children had destroyed the carpet in the basement playroom during unsupervised playtime, drawn on multiple walls with permanent markers that could not be removed, and broken a window that had been poorly patched with tape rather than properly repaired by professionals. Damage that my parents had hidden from the landlord for months, assuming they would deal with it eventually when they had more money. Eventually had finally arrived, and they had planned to make me pay for it all. The legal clinic appointment confirmed what I had feared. As a co-tenant, I was legally responsible for the lease regardless of whether I had knowingly agreed to the terms. My signature was on the document, and ignorance was not a valid legal defense. However, The law student who reviewed my case suggested a possible avenue that gave me hope. If you can prove that your signature was obtained through misrepresentation, you might be able to argue that the contract is voidable, she explained carefully. Did your parents tell you specifically what you were signing? They said it was for a utility account, to help build my credit for the future. Do you have any evidence of that? Texts, emails, anything that shows they deliberately misled you about the nature of the document? I thought back to that time 3 years ago. I had not been as diligent about documentation as I was now, but I remembered something important. My mom had sent me a text message asking me to sign what she called the electric bill paperwork. I had kept that phone, upgraded but backed up to my computer, and the message might still be there in my archives. That night, I spent hours searching through old backups until I finally found it. The text was dated November of 3 years ago, and it read, "Hi, honey. Can you come sign the electric bill paperwork when you get home? It'll help build your credit. Love, Mom. Electric bill paperwork. Not lease. Not rental agreement." A deliberate misrepresentation of what I was actually signing that day. I took screenshots and emailed them to the law student immediately. She responded within hours, her tone notably more optimistic than before. This helps significantly. It establishes that you were misled about the nature of the document. We can use this to argue that your consent was not informed, which may void your obligation as a co-tenant entirely. For the first time since the landlord's call, I felt genuine hope. But there was still the matter of my family and what this revelation meant for our relationship going forward. They had not just taken advantage of me, they had actively deceived me, placed me in legal jeopardy, and were now trying to make me responsible for their debts and their failures. Whatever guilt I had felt about leaving evaporated completely in that moment. Whatever lingering connection I had maintained to the idea that family meant unconditional support dissolved entirely. These people were not my family in any meaningful sense. They were strangers who had used my trust against me for their own benefit. And I was done being their victim forever. Armed with evidence and legal guidance, I began constructing a comprehensive plan. The first step was establishing documentation of everything that had happened. I saved every text message, every voicemail, every piece of evidence that showed my parents' pattern of deception and exploitation over the years. The second step was protecting myself financially going forward. I opened new bank accounts that my parents had no access to or knowledge of whatsoever. I changed my mailing address and made sure all my important documents were sent directly to my new apartment. I informed my employer of my new contact information and made absolutely sure my paychecks were being deposited into secure accounts. The third step was the hardest, confronting the truth about what my family had done and deciding how to respond appropriately. Part of me wanted revenge. Pure, uncomplicated revenge. I wanted to expose their lies publicly, ruin their reputations in the community, make them suffer the way they had made me suffer for years. I fantasized about calling their employers, their friends, their extended family, and telling everyone the truth about who they really were behind closed doors. But another part of me recognized that revenge would only keep me tied to them emotionally. Every action I took against them would be a reaction to their behavior, which meant they would still be controlling my life. True freedom meant letting go entirely, not holding on through hatred and resentment. I decided on a middle path. I would pursue justice within the legal system and protect my interests. I would protect myself from their debts and their manipulation completely, but I would not actively seek to destroy them. I would simply let the consequences of their own actions unfold naturally, without my interference. It did not take long for those consequences to begin. The landlord, Gerald, was surprisingly understanding when I presented my evidence and explained my situation in detail. He had been a landlord for decades and had seen his share of family disputes and manipulation tactics. After reviewing the text message and consulting with his own attorney, he agreed to remove my name from the lease retroactively. "Your parents should have been honest with you from the start," he said during our phone call. Putting someone's name on a legal document without their full understanding is fraud. I am not going to hold you responsible for their choices. The relief I felt was overwhelming. $6,000 I would not owe, an eviction that would not appear on my record. A fresh start that remained unblemished by their deception. But for my parents, the situation was about to get much worse. With my name removed from the lease, they were now solely responsible for the overdue rent and property damage. Gerald gave them 30 days to pay in full, or face eviction proceedings. He was no longer willing to extend the patience he had shown when he believed I was part of the household and would help resolve things. The calls started again, this time from unknown numbers that my family had borrowed or bought specifically to bypass my blocks. Voicemails filled with anger, desperation, and blame. "This is your fault," my mom screamed into my voicemail. "You ruined everything. You were supposed to help us, and instead, you abandoned us when we needed you most. I hope you know you are going straight to hell for what you have done to this family." "Haley, please," my dad said in another message, his tone switching to pleading. "We can work this out. Just come home and help us figure this out. We need you here." Brittany's messages were the most revealing of all. The landlord came by and said we have to pay like $6,000 or get kicked out of the house. This is insane and unfair. You need to fix this. These are my kids, Haley. Do you want my kids to be homeless on the street? Her kids. The kids she had never properly cared for. The kids she expected everyone else to raise while she pursued her own comfort. Now she was using them as emotional leverage, trying to guilt me into bailing out the family once again. I did not respond to any of the messages. 2 weeks later, I received word through a mutual family friend that my parents had been served with official eviction papers. They had failed to pay the overdue rent, failed to address the property damage, and failed to negotiate any kind of reasonable settlement with Gerald. The eviction process had officially begun. The same family friend also shared some other interesting developments happening at the house. My mom's lies about her employment had finally been discovered. My dad found a credit card statement for purchases made during hours she claimed to be working, purchases that placed her at a mall on the other side of town. The confrontation that followed had been explosive. They were now sleeping in separate rooms and barely speaking to each other. Brittany, faced with the prospect of actual homelessness for her children, had been forced to contact the fathers of her kids to ask for help. Tyler, Madison's father, had resurfaced after 5 years of complete absence and agreed to take partial custody. Curtis, Jaden's father, had returned from Las Vegas broke and broken, but willing to step up in a limited capacity. For the first time in their lives, my sister's children were going to have relationships with their fathers. Not because Brittany had facilitated it, but because she had no other choice but to reach out. The irony was not lost on me. My departure had forced my family to do what they should have done years ago: take responsibility for their own lives. The eviction was finalized 6 weeks after I left. My parents and sister moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town, a cramped 2-bedroom unit that they could barely afford, even with my dad working overtime and Brittany finally getting a job at a grocery store. I learned this through social media, where distant relatives posted supportive messages about the family's difficult transition and hard times. Nobody mentioned me. Nobody acknowledged that I had been pushed out, exploited, and deceived for years. In the family narrative, I was simply the ungrateful daughter who had abandoned them in their hour of need. I was okay with that. Their narrative was not my concern anymore. As for me, I thrived. Without the constant demands of babysitting and household management, I had time to focus on my studies. My grades improved dramatically. I picked up additional shifts at the coffee shop and started building a genuine savings account. I made friends for the first time in years, people who valued my company rather than my usefulness. Whitney, my roommate, became one of those friends. We stayed up late talking about our dreams and our fears. She told me about her research in marine biology and her hopes of working for a conservation organization after graduation. I told her about my past, about my family, about the years of exploitation I had endured. "You survived something really hard," she said one night. as we sat on our tiny balcony, watching the sun set over Omaha. Not everyone would have had the courage to leave. I did not feel courageous, I admitted honestly. I felt terrified. I still feel terrified sometimes. That is what courage is, Whitney replied, being scared and doing it anyway. 3 months after my midnight departure, I received an unexpected visitor. I was walking back from class when I saw a familiar figure sitting on the steps of my apartment building. It was my mom. She looked older than I remembered, more tired. The lines around her eyes had deepened, and her hair had more gray than I had noticed before. She stood up when she saw me approaching, her expression uncertain and nervous. "Haley," she said, "can we talk?" Every instinct told me to walk away, to protect the peace I had built, to refuse any further engagement with someone who had caused me so much harm. But curiosity got the better of me. 5 minutes, I said. Then you leave. We sat on a bench near the building, maintaining a careful distance. My mom folded her hands in her lap and stared at the ground. "I am not here to ask you to come back," she said finally. "I know you will not, and I know why." I waited, saying nothing. "Gerald, the landlord, he told me what he found out. About the lease. About how we misled you." She paused, struggling with the words. "I did not think of it as fraud at the time. I thought I was helping you build credit. I thought it would be good for you." "You thought it would be good for you," I corrected. "You thought that if something went wrong, I would be on the hook. You used me as a safety net without telling me." She did not deny it. "I have made a lot of mistakes," she said quietly. "With you, with Brittany, with your father. I thought I was holding the family together, but I was just holding on to control." It was the closest thing to an apology I had ever received from her. And yet, it was not enough. "I needed you to be my mother," I said, my voice cracking despite my efforts to stay calm. "I needed you to protect me, not exploit me. I needed you to see that Brittany was taking advantage of everyone, including her own children. I needed you to be fair." "I know. But you were not. You chose her. Every single time you chose her. And you expected me to just accept it, to keep giving and giving until there was nothing left of me." My mom looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I am sorry, Haley. I am so sorry." It was the first time she had ever said those words to me, genuinely, without qualifications or excuses. I let them sit in the air for a long moment. "I believe you," I finally said. "But sorry does not erase what happened. Sorry does not give me back the years I lost. Sorry does not rebuild trust that you systematically destroyed. I know it does not. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am just asking for a chance. A chance to show you that I can be different, that I can respect your boundaries and treat you like you deserve." I considered her request. The anger I had carried for so long had begun to fade, replaced by something more complicated. Grief, maybe. Or acceptance. "I am not ready for that," I said honestly. "Maybe someday. But not now." My mom nodded, accepting my answer without argument. "Can I at least have a way to reach you, in case of emergencies?" I gave her my email address. Not my phone number, not my address, just email. It was more than she deserved, but it was what I could offer. She thanked me and left. I sat on that bench for a long time after she was gone, processing what had just happened. My mom had apologized, had admitted her mistakes, had asked for a second chance. 6 months ago, I would have given it to her instantly. I would have rushed to forgive, to reconcile, to return to the familiar patterns of my old life. But I was not that person anymore. I had learned that some relationships could not be repaired, that some damage was too deep for apologies to reach, that choosing yourself was not selfish but necessary. My family would have to rebuild without me, and I would have to build a new life without them. Both paths led forward. Both required courage. I chose mine. 1 year had passed since I slipped out of my parents' house in the middle of the night. 1 year of growth, healing, and transformation that I never could have imagined when I was trapped in that suffocating environment. I graduated from the University of Nebraska at Omaha with a degree in accounting and a job offer from a regional firm that specialized in nonprofit financial management. The salary was modest but steady, enough to afford my own apartment and start building a real future. Whitney had moved across the country for a research position at a marine institute in California, but we stayed in touch through video calls and text messages. She had become the sister I never had, the kind of relationship built on mutual respect rather than obligation. My actual family remained on the periphery of my life. My mom sent occasional emails, updates about Brittany's job and the children's progress, questions about my own well-being that I answered briefly and neutrally. The relationship was distant, but civil. It was the best I could offer. Brittany had surprised everyone, including herself. Forced to take responsibility for her children without the safety net I had provided, she had stepped up in ways nobody expected. She was still far from perfect, but she was present. She had enrolled Madison in kindergarten and was working with Curtis to establish a stable co-parenting arrangement for Jaden. The children were better off. That was the most unexpected outcome of my departure. Without me serving as the default caregiver, their actual parents had been forced to engage. Madison now spent weekends with Tyler, who had gotten sober and was rebuilding his life. Jaden was developing a relationship with Curtis that, while imperfect, was real. My leaving had not destroyed the family. It had simply forced them to function without their crutch. I thought about that often as I built my new life. How my sacrifice had not helped anyone in the end. How my presence had enabled dysfunction rather than curing it. How sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is let them face the consequences of their choices. The anger I had carried for so long had faded into something softer. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. I could not change what had happened. I could only choose how to move forward. And I chose peace. On the anniversary of my midnight departure, I took myself out to dinner at a nice restaurant downtown. I sat alone at a table by the window, watching the city lights reflect off the glass, and allowed myself to feel proud. I had escaped a situation that many people never find the courage to leave. I had built a life on my own terms, without the constant weight of others' expectations. I had learned to value myself enough to demand better. It had not been easy. There were nights when the loneliness felt overwhelming. There were moments when I questioned whether I had done the right thing. There were times when the guilt crept back, whispering that I had abandoned people who needed me. But sitting in that restaurant, independent and whole, I knew the truth. They had never needed me. They had used me. And when I stopped allowing it, they found other ways to survive. The difference between need and use is the difference between love and exploitation. My family had exploited me for years under the guise of love, and I had accepted it because I did not know any better. Now, I knew better, and I would never go back. As for my parents and sister, the consequences of their choices continued to unfold in ways both predictable and unexpected. My dad's overtime hours had taken a toll on his health, resulting in a minor heart incident that forced him to cut back and face the financial reality they had been avoiding. My mom eventually found a part-time job at a retail store, swallowing her pride to contribute to the household in a tangible way. Brittany's relationship with Curtis deteriorated when his gambling addiction resurfaced, but Tyler stepped in more fully, eventually seeking joint custody of Madison. The small apartment became emptier as the children spent more time with their fathers, and my parents were left with the quiet they had never wanted, forced to rebuild their marriage without children to distract from their problems. The $6,000 in damage and back rent had been negotiated into a payment plan that would follow them for years, a constant reminder of how their deception had backfired. And through it all, they learned what I had known all along, that you cannot build stability on someone else's sacrifice, that eventually the foundation cracks and everything comes tumbling down around you. Looking back now, I understand that slipping out of that house at 2:14 in the morning was the moment I finally chose myself. It was not revenge in the traditional sense. There was no dramatic confrontation, no public humiliation, no calculated scheme to make them suffer. There was only a quiet decision to stop being a victim and start being the author of my own story. The freedom I found on the other side was not handed to me. I earned it through courage, through loss, through the painful process of unlearning everything I had been taught about duty and family. And while the journey was harder than anything I had ever done, it led me somewhere worth going, to a life that was finally, completely my own.